The storm had come from nowhere, a sheet of iron dragged across the sky, splitting the afternoon into before and after. Elara Cole rode with her head low and her hat wired tight, feeling the rain hit sideways, feeling the land hold its breath. She knew these plains, knew how they turned to mirrors and then to traps when water found the old wagon ruts. She aimed for the basalt ridge she used as a landmark, counting lightning, tasting dust and metal. When the storm finally limped west, the world looked wrung out cold, rinsed, and listening for what survived. She dismounted to check her mare's cinch and heard it something between a grunt and a prayer. It wasn't wind. It wasn't coyote. It came from the line of willow and cottonwood, where the creek sometimes remembered to be a creek. Elara led her mare, boots sinking into spongy earth, breathing the after-smell of rain and sage. The sound came again, rawer now, a living thing refusing to agree with pain. She pushed aside branches slick with water and saw the horse. Slate gray, taller than sense, flanks dappling with raindrops and blood. A short shaft of arrow stuck above the shoulder. The Mustang saw her and froze, head high, eyes wide. She went still, too, because stillness is a language. The creek whispered around stones, as if practicing gentleness. "Easy," she said, voice level as a ledge. "I ain't your trouble." He blew a wet breath, front right trembling under weight, left ear flicking. Elara took off her hat, showing sky. Men had taught her that horses look first for shape, then for story. She turned so he could smell rain on her coat, leather and coffee and honest work. "I can cut what hurts," she added, "or try." Getting within arm's reach took the rest of the afternoon, and whatever patience grief had carved into her bones. She talked about nothing, the price of oats in Laramie, the way thunder tastes like pennies, the brother who promised he'd write from the silver camp and didn't. He blinked, slower. When she lifted her hand, he neither flinched nor offered trust. He simply chose not to leave. That was enough. She wedged her body against his shoulder and snapped the arrow off clean, leaving the head inside for later. He shuddered, then stood taller, as if remembering his height. She rinsed the wound with creek water warmed between her palms, working mud away in slow circles. He watched her like a judge who'd seen too many confessions. "You're tougher than you look," she murmured. But pain don't care about bravery. She packed the cut with the last of her pine gum salve, wrapped it in a torn strip from her underskirt, tied neat knots. When she stepped back, he tested the leg as if the earth might lie. It didn't. He lowered his head and snorted once, not thanks, not surrender, something older than words and more binding. That should have been the end. She'd done the human thing. Ride on, sleep high, let morning finish what hands started. But when she turned toward her mare, he stepped forward and brushed her sleeve with his whiskers like a question. "No," she said, already knowing it was yes. He limped upstream, not away from her, but across her path, pausing to confirm she'd noticed. Elara blew out a small laugh at the sky's old habit of choosing for her. "You want leadin' or followin'?" He flicked his ear. "Thought so," she said. "I'll keep up if you'll slow." They moved along the creek where stormwash shone like spilled coins. The land beyond was a quilt of slickstone and rabbit brush, smelling of wet basalt and plans. Sometimes the Mustang stopped, as if remembering the exact shape of a bruise. Sometimes he moved like a rumor, sure and sudden. Elara let her mare trail behind, loose rein, listening to the creek's lesson about going around what can't be beaten. The sun gave up and left the sky to pewter. She weighed camp against daylight, ridge against river, hunger against promise. The horse turned left, promise won. They passed petroglyphs she'd never seen, spirals and antlered dancers etched into varnished rock where rain rarely lingered. The Mustang paused and sniffed as if reading names. Elara tipped her hat to the old carvers and kept walking. A canyon opened without warning, narrow at first, then a throat, swallowing them into shadow. The air cooled and smelled of limestone and fern, a rare perfume that made her remember a garden her mother once kept in a year when water behaved. High above, the sky shrank to a ribbon. The horses' hoofbeats learned to whisper. Elara struck a lamp long enough to read the walls, then pinched the flame when bats argued with light. The floor sloped gently upward, slick in places where mineral seep made glass. She put her hand against the Mustang's neck for balance. Heat pulsed steady under skin, a drum finding its right tempo. "You know this place," she said. He didn't answer, horses never do, but he stopped when she stumbled and started when she steadied, which was answer enough. Somewhere ahead, water changed its mind from creek to fall. She heard it in the distance, folding air. They emerged at dusk into a bowl of rock that hoarded what the desert forgot to steal. Juniper clung to ledges. Maidenhair fern rode drips in thin green chandeliers. The fall wasn't grand, not in height, but in generosity. A sheet of wool-bright water stitching a pool into patience. The Mustang walked into the shallows, trembling once as cold found heat. He lowered his face and drank with the restraint of a gentleman offered his first good whiskey in months. Elara knelt, cupped water to her mouth, and felt grit become blessing on her tongue. Camp was simple. Her saddle, a pillow. Her duster, a roof. A circle of stones guarding a small fire that thought better of bragging in this hush. She plucked burrs from the Mustang's mane and found scars layered like old news. "Somebody tried to buy your soul with a rope," she said. "Looks like you kept the expensive part." He dozed standing. She envied creatures who trusted sleep with their ribs exposed. The canyon breathed deeper as night cooled stone. Somewhere a ringtail quarreled with an owl over air rights. Elara's thoughts slowed to match the drip's metronome. Dreams came careful. She saw her brother on the floodplain, grinning with his hat held by a thumb through the crown. Water up to his knees, then to his waist. "El!" he shouted. "Look where the river don't want to be." She woke with grit on her cheek and the shape of his name on her throat. The embers glowed like village windows. The Mustang stood where she left him, a darker dark against dark, drawing breath she could hear across the pool. "I'm still here," she told the night. The night, polite for once, didn't argue. Morning gilded the canyon a penny at a time. Her mare nickered low. The Mustang answered with a hum that felt like continuity more than greeting. Elara warmed coffee and tore yesterday's biscuit, softening it in the cup, remembering a kitchen she didn't belong to anymore. The Mustang tested the leg's short stride, then longer, then fine. When she rose to cinch her saddle, he stepped past her and pointed with his whole body toward a fracture in the far wall, a slot thin as a wish. "More?" she asked. He waited, a compass that had chosen troubles. The slot climbed. It asked ankles to remember. It asked breath to ration itself like beans in poor season. Sun sharpened to a white blade overhead, cutting shadows into exact answers. Elara steadied the Mustang when the floor tilted mean, and let him pull her when handholds lied. They became a two-creature rope, slack and taut in useful turns. Midway, the world narrowed to the size of her shoulder rock. Slick on one side, horsehide on the other. "Not how I pictured today," she said, grinning at nobody. Nobody grinned back, but approved anyway. The slot sighed them onto a ledge no map had bothered to dream. Wind rose cool from nowhere, carrying the smell of grass warmed by a sun she couldn't see yet. The Mustang stood with his ears forward, claiming distance like a deed. Elara eased to the edge and looked down. There was a valley where no valley should be cupped in stone, stitched with water, trees throwing shadows like anchors, meadows so green they hustled the word away from spring and toward miracle. Mist hung in swales as if morning practiced staying. Birds argued in languages older than fences. She didn't speak right away. People ruin first sights, naming them too quick. The Mustang snorted softly as if taking attendance. Sky here, grass there. Water accounted for. Snow still clung high in the cirque above, bright as confession, but the floor below hadn't read winter's memo. Wildflowers fretted every seam, scarlet, gilia, lupine, paintbrush colors, working overtime to prove something to doubt. Elara sank onto her heels, gloved hand on stone to steady a heart that had decided to remember how to want. "Where did you bring me?" she whispered, and whined turned the question blessed. The descent looked like a dare. A switchback cut by goats, then faith. Elara studied the ridge, studied her hips, studied the horse whose leg already owed her nothing. "We could camp here," she told him. "Let wanting be a view." He stepped toward the first shelf of path and waited. Weight light on the bad side. She laughed under her breath. "You're bossy," she said. "Fine. We go." She tested each shelf with her boot, speaking to her bones like a foreman with a good crew. Slow, smart, steady. The valley rose to meet them, as generous places do. Halfway down, the world opened its throat and sang water. The path brought them along a cascade that fell in terraced lips, moss catching spray in little gardens. Elara reached to feel the fringe, and found it warm, where sun had bragged for hours. A swallow traced a loop so perfect it looked rehearsed. "This place forgot the clock," she said. The Mustang paused by a boulder veined with quartz, sniffed, then touched his muzzle to her sleeve again, as if to anchor her before the last turn. She realized she hadn't thought of leaving since she'd seen the first green. They stepped onto meadow as gentle as an apology long overdue. The soil took weight like a mother catching a child who jumped too soon. Grass bowed around their shins, cool and articulate. The Mustang's stride lengthened. The limp noticed its options and chose not to insist. Elara turned in a slow circle to read the ring of cliffs for doors, and found several dark commas promising more sentences. At the meadow's heart, a stand of aspens trembled, though there was no wind. She put her palm to one white trunk and felt a pulse. Maybe it was hers, answering. Finally. She didn't rush the center. Wonder deserves the long way. They followed the golden river, where it widened into a sheet thin enough to count stones beneath. Small fish stitched the shallows into arithmetic. A hummingbird scolded them for being strangers, and then forgave them for noticing. Time stopped here, Elara said, and surprised herself by smiling. Or maybe it learned manners. The Mustang waded into his knees, then higher, then stood still, closing his eyes like a man at a holy spring. Elara touched the water, the horse, the air. "All right," she whispered. "Show me the rest." By midday, warmth had stitched itself across the valley like an invisible quilt. Elara spread her coat on a flat stone and let the sun do its work on her shoulders. The Mustang grazed knee-deep in clover, careful on the leg that no longer bled but still remembered. Around them, the air was thicker with life than reason bees. Small blue butterflies, the rustle of things, unafraid. She closed her eyes and felt time hesitate, as if deciding whether to keep her on the ledger. "If this is heaven," she murmured, "it's wearing a good disguise." She found shelter beneath a stand of cottonwoods near the Golden River's bend. Someone or something had been there once. A half-collapsed corral, a stone hearth, a tin cup, still upright beside the ashes. She touched it. It felt recently warmed, though the fire had long died. "You led me to somebody's ghost," she told the Mustang. He flicked an ear, unconcerned. She unpacked her bedroll, stoked a small flame, brewed coffee dark enough to taste like purpose. The smell curled upward, and for a moment she could swear she heard laughter, faint as wind behind curtains. When evening began to bleed into the cliffs, colors went from gold to bruised violet. The Mustang came close, shoulder brushing her sleeve, then wandered toward the aspens. Their white trunks shimmered in half-light, and something about them, those pale bodies trembling with every secret, pulled her up from the fire. She followed, stepping between them, boots sinking into moss that smelled faintly of rain on copper. In the center stood a single aspen broader than the rest, its bark carved with names so old they had learned to fade politely. She leaned close. One name refused to vanish. COA. She stared until her heartbeat stopped, pretending to be calm. The carving was deep, too clean for weather. Her family name sharp against the white bark. "No," she said softly, as if the tree might apologize. Her brother used to carve initials everywhere. Door frames, tool handles, the back of their father's saddle, but he'd never seen this valley. Couldn't have, unless storms obeyed him now. She touched the grooves with 2 fingers, half expecting them to bleed. "James Cole," she whispered. "You stubborn fool. You found another way to write home." The leaves shivered like confirmation. Back at camp, she fed the fire wood that smelled of juniper and disbelief. The Mustang stood a little off, head low, eyes half shut. "You know something," she told him. "That much I'll bet the moon on." He flicked his tail as if agreement were beneath him. She stared into the flames, seeing maps where there were none. If James had been here, what had brought him, and what had kept him from returning? The question folded itself into her chest and refused to sleep. She poured coffee, bitter enough to match the ache, and promised the night nothing. Dream came heavy and exact. She was younger, still on the family ranch, storm coming fast. James ran ahead with a lantern, shouting that the horses had broken fence again. She followed, boots sinking in flooded dust. Lightning turned him to silhouette, then to memory. When she caught up, he wasn't there, only the echo of hooves and the smell of smoke. Then the valley appeared, lit by impossible sun, her brother waving from a ridge she'd never ridden. "Follow him," a voice behind her said, low as wind through sage. She turned. The Mustang stood there, whole, unhurt, waiting. Morning blurred the line between dream and duty. The fire had died to quiet ash, and dew beaded her saddle like small truths. The Mustang grazed nearby, soundless as prayer. She filled her cup from the river, drank slow, tasting something mineral and familiar, as if the water had borrowed from her childhood well. "All right," she told the horse. "If this place wants to talk, I'm listenin'." He raised his head, nostrils flaring toward the far slope, where mist pooled like breath. "That way, then." She cinched her belt and followed him into the green that never asked directions. The path wound through knee-high grass and clusters of wild roses. Bees worked like old men, steady, unbothered by miracles. The Mustang walked ahead, stopping now and then to check she hadn't fallen behind, which felt almost like tenderness. After an hour, they reached a rise where the valley opened wider, showing another basin beyond. There, half swallowed by vines, stood a cabin, small, crooked, but still fighting collapse. Smoke marks blackened the stones around the chimney. Elara's breath caught. The shape of it, the tilt of the roof, it was her father's design, down to the notch on the eaves. She dismounted, boots sinking into damp earth, heart hammering a tempo old as regret. The door creaked when she touched it. Inside smelled of pine pitch and sleep long gone. A table slouched under dust. A tin plate waited like faith misplaced. On the wall hung a lasso and a single horseshoe, polished by time's polite hand. She ran her fingers across the wood. "How?" she asked the silence. It didn't try to explain. The Mustang stood at the threshold, eyes soft. He stepped once inside and snorted, the sound almost reverent. "Yeah," she said, "feels familiar to me too." She found a ledger on the shelf near the window, pages browned and curled. The writing was her brother's, jagged, impatient. Storm took the river south, found valley. No map owns. Horse led me, staying till I mend. The ink stopped there, as if he'd been interrupted by survival. A dried flower was pressed between pages, its petals still faintly blue. She traced it, heart thrumming like the beginning of a gallop. "So you made it," she whispered. "You made it. Somewhere." The Mustang nudged her shoulder. She smiled, small and helpless. "He led you too, didn't he?" She stepped outside to breathe the news. The valley hummed quietly, as if pleased with being understood. The sun leaned west, washing everything in a honeyed glow that made grief almost look kind. Elara sat on the porch step, letting the world settle around her boots. "If you're still here, James," she said, "you picked a fine hideout." The wind answered through grass, carrying the faint rhythm of hooves that weren't theirs. She looked up, sharply. The Mustang's ears pricked, then relaxed. Nothing visible moved, but the sound lingered, like a promise halfway to becoming. That night she couldn't bring herself to leave the cabin. She rebuilt the fire in the hearth, found a can of beans still sealed, and cooked them slow. The taste was tin and nostalgia. The Mustang lay near the door, head tucked, breathing steady. "We're ghosts in someone else's memory," she told him. He twitched one ear, unbothered by philosophy. She wrote James's name on the inside of the door with charcoal from the fire. It felt like keeping him home instead of gone. The flames flickered lower, their crackle sounding almost like the scratch of a pen finishing a story. Rain came again, light, playful, uninterested and drowning. The drops tapped on the roof like fingers counting blessings. Elara stepped outside, face turned up, letting it clean what sorrow had made sticky. The Mustang joined her, nostrils wide, mane plastered to his neck. He looked younger in the rain, less legend, more survivor. "You brought me where I needed to be," she said. "That's a tall order for one horse." He closed his eyes, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might vanish, just fold back into the valley, the way storms fold into cloud. But he stayed. By noon the next day, new flowers had appeared near the porch, tiny white bells she hadn't noticed before. The valley seemed to grow while she blinked. She walked its edges, tracing how warmth met frost, like handshake instead of fight. At one patch of earth, she found a row of small stones, hand-placed. Beneath the first, a bit of wood with carved initials, J.C. Her knees gave out before thought could intervene. "You did rest," she said. "You just didn't send word." She sat there until the sun moved past sympathy and into simple light. The Mustang grazed close, careful not to disturb the stones. When she rose, he followed her back toward the aspens. Each step felt measured, like dancing in a church. "Maybe this valley keeps what it loves," she said aloud. "Maybe it ain't about bein' found, but about belongin' once you stop runnin'." A breeze carried petals across her boots, landing soft. She thought of her brother, laughing at her seriousness, of their mother saying the earth remembers everything if you listen right. "I'm listenin'," she whispered. The valley's silence answered like agreement wearing patience. The next morning brought fog, thick as fleece. She couldn't see the cliffs, only the golden river, tracing faint sound through the gray. The Mustang moved like a ghost beside her, shape without edge. Then, through the haze, she saw movement another horse, pale as moonlight, watching from across the water. Its reflection trembled, unsure which side was real. Elara held her breath. The injured Mustang called softly, and the pale one stepped closer, unhurried. Two halves of the same story, reunited. "You had someone waiting," Elara murmured. "Guess we all did." They crossed the river together, water lapping at her boots, cold biting through leather. The two horses touched noses, then moved apart just enough to share space without ownership. Watching them, Elara felt something in her chest finally uncoil. "Time didn't stop," she said quietly. "It just waited." She turned, scanning the cliffs. For the first time, she noticed an opening higher up, a dark oval framed by flowering vines, pulsing with soft light. The Mustang looked at it too, then at her. That's what you wanted to show me, huh? He dipped his head once, like a bow. She climbed halfway before realizing she was crying, not the sharp kind that burns, but the slow kind that cleans. The path was gentle, carved long ago by care, not desperation. Inside the opening, light shimmered off walls veined with quartz, casting rainbows onto the rock. In the center lay a pool no bigger than a trough, water so clear it seemed to breathe. On its surface floated a single blue flower, identical to the one pressed in James's ledger. Elara knelt, touched the water, and felt warmth travel up her arm into her heartbeat. The Mustang stood at the entrance, wind ruffling his mane. He seemed whole again, or maybe she was seeing him right for the first time. "So this is it," she said softly. "The heart of it," the cave answered with a low hum, neither threatening nor kind, just aware. She dropped the flower back into the pool and watched it spin slowly, as if searching for where to rest. "You can go now," she told the horse. "You brought me home." He didn't move. Instead, he stepped closer, rested his forehead against her shoulder, and exhaled the wordless version of goodbye. Outside, the fog lifted in one long sigh. The valley below glowed again, every leaf sharp as memory. Elara stood at the cave mouth, feeling the air change around her lighter, freer, final. The Mustang trotted a few paces down, sure-footed, no limp left. She watched until he joined the pale horse in the meadow, two figures crossing into brightness. "All right," she said to the wind. "Message received." She turned toward the cabin, heart steady as hooves on soft ground. The valley was no longer a secret. It was a promise kept. Morning unfolded like forgiveness. The valley breathed mist that tasted of dew and ash, old endings, new beginnings. Elara sat on the cabin porch, boots still damp from yesterday's climb. The Mustang grazed near the river, his coat shining silver instead of slate. The pale mare stayed close, flicking her tail through sunlight. "Guess you're stayin'," Elara murmured. She ran a hand over the rough step beside her. The wood felt alive again, sap moving somewhere deep inside. "And maybe I am too for a spell." The valley answered with birds that sounded like laughter, remembering itself. Days found their rhythm. She mended the roof, patched the shutter, and swept the dust that wasn't hers into the wind. The Mustangs came and went as they pleased, guardians and guests all at once. At dusk, light dripped down the canyon walls like honey too thick to hurry. She cooked beans in her brother's pot, drank from the same tin cup, and learned the precise moment evening turned into peace. Grief, she realized, was only love without instructions. The valley had given her new ones. Stay gentle, breathe slow, let beauty earn its noise. Once, a hawk dropped a feather near her boot, long, dark, sharp at the tip. She set it on the table, between the ledger and the blue flower, now pressed inside another page. "He would have liked you," she told the feather, meaning her brother, meaning the world that wasn't cruel anymore. The Mustang snorted from the doorway, as if aware of being praised. Elara laughed softly. "Don't let it go to your head." He chewed, unimpressed. The simple talk filled the space where silence used to echo. Even quiet felt changed, warmer, like wool over bone instead of stone. By the third week, trails began to show paths made by hooves and her own wandering curiosity. She followed one up toward the north rim, where frost clung stubbornly to shadow. From there she could see the desert again, pale and distant, a memory caught behind glass. She realized no one down there would believe this place existed. Maybe they weren't supposed to. Some miracles preferred to keep their address unlisted. She took off her hat, let the cold wind find her hair. "You can rest easy, James," she whispered. "You were right to stay." That night, the air shifted. The horses grew restless, ears twitching toward the ridge. Elara stepped outside, and saw clouds building fast, thin white sheets, harmless looking but moving with intent. The valley seemed to glow from within, as if it planned to weather the storm differently. She felt no fear, only attention. "You wouldn't bring me here just to take it back," she said to the wind. It ruffled her coat like reassurance. The first drops came soft, cool, more light than wet, and each one sparked on the grass like sparks caught in green velvet. Lightning stayed far, polite beyond the cliffs. The rain turned steady, wrapping the valley in a shimmering curtain. Elara stood bareheaded, letting it wash the road dust she hadn't realized she still carried. The Mustangs joined her, side by side, unafraid. Their manes darkened, water dripping from lashes. For a heartbeat, she thought she saw shapes moving in the downpour, figures like riders, transparent as thought, circling slow above the river. One looked back, and she didn't need to see the face. She nodded once. The rain passed through them, leaving peace behind like footprints that refused to fade. When morning came clear, the valley sparkled. Every leaf bore a jewel. Every stone hummed with patience. The air smelled of rain's afterward clean promises, no apologies. Elara saddled her mare for the first time since arriving. "Time to see if the world remembers us," she said. The Mustangs followed to the ridge, stopping where rock turned to snow. "Stay," she told them. They did, shoulder to shoulder, guardians carved from grace. "You showed me what was left to love," she added. Then she rode up toward the canyon mouth, the same path that had once been a wound. The way out felt shorter, as if distance folded itself in thanks. Light fell differently, too gentler, aware of who watched. The canyon's damp walls glowed amber in reflection, and the air carried no threat, only memory. When she reached the narrow slot, she paused and looked back. From here, the valley looked impossible again, a shimmer of green in a land meant for dust. "Keep your secrets," she whispered. "I'll keep mine." Then she rode on, boots clicking soft rhythm on stone. The sound of leaving softened by the knowledge that not all departures are endings. Beyond the cliffs, the desert waited, pale and endless. The first settlement she reached was a mining camp near Dry Fork. The men there stared like they'd seen a ghost ride out of Sunrise. "You been out where no one comes back," one said. Elara smiled slow. "That's half true." They offered her whiskey, questions, and disbelief. She took the first, skipped the rest. "There's a place," she finally said, "that doesn't belong to maps. Best leave it that way." The barkeep nodded, understanding without proof. "Some spots don't take kindly to being found," he said. "Sounds friendly," she replied. She stayed 2 nights, trading stories for supplies. When a young prospector asked what she was looking for next, she thought about lying, then didn't. "Work," she said simply. "And somewhere quiet enough to hear my own heartbeat," he grinned. "Ain't much pay in that." "There's more than you'd think," she said. At dawn, she rode out again, saddle heavier with beans, lighter with ghosts. The desert wind greeted her like an old acquaintance who'd learned new manners. She found herself humming a tune she couldn't name but had always known, somewhere under all that silence. Weeks passed. She helped a rancher mend fence, shared her coffee with a widow who talked more to her chickens than people, delivered mail down canyon roads that barely remembered being roads. Everywhere she went, people said she looked rested, like she'd met sleep's older sister. She smiled and said nothing. At night, she still saw the valley in dreams, grass moving like breath, water running backward into light. Once, she thought she heard the Mustang's call across miles of sand, low and steady, reminding her that some bonds ignore distance the way rivers ignore advice. By late summer, she found herself back near her family's old ranch. The house was gone, eaten by storms, but the well still stood. She drew water, half expecting it to taste of the valley. It did faintly, sweet with memory. She poured some on the ground, watching dust, turned dark. "For you, James," she said. "And for whatever waits kind enough to take us home." Crickets began their slow hymn. She built a small fire, sat beside it, and realized that for the first time in years, she wasn't waiting for anything except the next morning. That night, the stars crowded close, curious. She traced constellations the way her father once taught her, renaming them to fit her story. The brightest she called the Rider, another the River that stayed gold. Somewhere between them shimmered a smaller light that pulsed like hoofbeats. She smiled. "I see you," she said. The air shifted, a whisper sliding through mesquite leaves. Not words, exactly, just recognition. Elara leaned back, hat tipped low, and let the sky finish its side of the conversation. When dawn painted her boots silver, she felt blessed instead of forgiven. It was enough. Travel became choice instead of escape. She drifted between towns like wind borrowing directions. People learned her name slowly, through kindness more than introduction. They said she had eyes that saw weather coming before clouds bothered to. Children liked her stories, especially the one about a valley that bloomed in snow. "Is it real?" they'd ask. "As real as you're brave," she'd answer. Sometimes, when dusk caught her between roads, she thought she saw two horses on a far ridge watching. She never waved. Some memories preferred distance to words, but her heart always waved back. One autumn evening, she returned to the ridge above Dry Fork. The canyon entrance was there, unchanged, but the path beyond had sealed itself with rockslide and time. She dismounted, walked closer, touched the cool stone. It thrummed faintly, like a held breath. "You close the door," she said. "Good." She knelt, placed her palm flat, feeling warmth under the surface, life continuing without witness. "Thank you for keeping what's worth keeping." A single white feather drifted down, landing near her boot. She smiled, pocketed it, and felt lighter. Doors that close right never sound like loss. The years ahead unfolded simple. Seasons did their work without tragedy. Elara grew lines around her eyes that looked suspiciously like laughter's handiwork. The Mustang never came back, but every herd she saw had one gray shape leading from front, and that was proof enough. On quiet nights, she'd light a fire and drop a pinch of wildflowers into the flames, watching color turn to smoke. "Carry this home," she'd tell it. The smoke always traveled north. Maybe that's where forever lived, in the direction your gratitude takes when you stop steering. One spring, she woke before dawn to the sound of rain that wasn't rain. It was hooves, distant, steady. She stepped outside barefoot, heart stumbling into memory. Through the pale light, she saw them. Two Mustangs, one gray, one pale, moving along the horizon line. They didn't pause, didn't need to. "You're still watchin'," she whispered. "Good." She raised a hand. The gray lifted its head as if answering. Then they were gone, swallowed by dawn. Elara laughed quietly. "Time didn't stop after all," she said. "It just learned to walk beside me." By summer, she settled near a creek that reminded her of the Golden River's voice. She built a small corral, not for keeping, but for greeting. Travelers came, shared meals, left lighter. They called her the woman who listens to horses, and she didn't correct them. Sometimes she'd tell the valley story, when the night grew kind. No one ever asked where it was. Maybe they already knew. You don't need a map to reach mercy, you need a reason to follow. The fire would pop, sparks rising like tiny prayers, and every face around it would soften. Years later, when her hair had turned the color of first frost, she walked again to that ridge. The desert was quieter now, respectful of her steps. She stood where rock met memory and looked toward where the valley once shimmered. Clouds hung low, but a single break spilled sunlight exactly where she imagined it to be. "Still there," she whispered. The wind carried the smell of wildflowers, though none bloomed nearby. She closed her eyes and saw it green forever. 2 horses running, her brother waving from the porch. Peace looked back and nodded. When the last light touched her face, Elara smiled. The world had given her back. Everything she thought was gone, just rearranged. The story was finished, but not ended like a song that chooses to echo instead of fade. Somewhere beyond sight, the golden river kept turning, reflecting a sky that no longer hurried. The valley waited, unchanged, welcoming, whole, and the Mustang, gray as dusk, strong as memory, still led the way through snow into bloom, carrying the echo of a woman's laughter through a land that had finally remembered how to be kind.